All right, everybody, welcome to the last HackSummer episode. We have a lot to do today, but first, as always, we're going to get started with This Week in Cyber. We have a little bit of cyber news, not a whole lot this week. It's been a little bit quieter than it was in weeks past, but let's get started with a recap on the Zero Logon vulnerability. If you remember from last week, or from literally anywhere in cyber news for the last little bit, a vulnerability was found in a service that exists on Windows servers called NetLogon. The vulnerability was numbered CVE 2020-1472, and the crux of the matter is that a cryptographic flaw would allow an attacker to, from an unauthenticated state, gain the ability to reset passwords for administrators on the machine. And if you're the domain admin on a Windows domain controller, that's the ball game. You own their network. So, I wonder if that's what got me banned, talking about that last week. Oh well, those are the facts of the vulnerability. Now, this week has seen a flurry of proofs of concept of this vulnerability. Lots of stuff on GitHub, a lot of things being shared on Twitter. This is a serious vulnerability. And consequently, looks like I'm having some issues with my camera. So, see if I can't fix that in a second if it keeps going. So not only did we see that Zero Logon was affecting Windows controllers, but it also turns out that some devices that run are vulnerable to it as well. Let me just see if I can fix this issue with the camera real quick. Okay, that should be a little bit better. All right. So, in addition to all of the new proofs of concept and vulnerability ways of exploiting this vulnerability that came out this week, the federal government in the United States released an urgent notice telling all federal system administrators to update their systems because that's how dangerous this thing is. And in particular, any internet-connected systems that are using Windows domain controller, Windows Active Directory, and are connected directly to the internet are really, really juicy targets for this. So if you happen to be in an organization that uses Windows Active Directory, odds are that you will be. Most businesses do these days. You're going to want to make sure that this is something that has been patched by your system administrators, by the correct individuals and groups in your organization. You don't want to have this be a vulnerability that sticks around for long. We're already seeing sophisticated attackers, or at least persistent attackers, use this vulnerability in attacks in the wild. So get it patched now. The last bit of cyber news for this week is a bit of cyber archaeology. Kind of a cool, it was a leak, so it wasn't, an intentional disclosure, but kind of a cool bit of history here where the Windows XP source code was leaked online. Why this is interesting is that Windows XP, I mean, obviously we don't always get to see the internals of Windows. That's something that we're not privy to because Windows isn't open source. And so Windows XP, because it was such a pivotal development for the Windows operating system, moving from Windows 95, 98, 2000, XP was a massive update in the way that at least the front end of Windows, not so much the NT kernel, but the way that the front end worked, Really fascinating to see. Also worth mentioning that at this point there are so many vulnerabilities that are known in Windows XP, at least the Windows XP, well, even the patch versions with the later service packs, but certainly the original Windows XP, that it's interesting from a security standpoint to look at the code and see exactly where the vulnerabilities resided. And you can see on Twitter, if you look through this story, some examples of people finding, this is where this famous vulnerability resided, and this is where this one did. So pretty cool to check that out if you're interested in a little bit of, computing history and to see how the Windows operating system really works under the hood. All right, with cyber news out of the way, we are ready to get started with our very last episode of HackSummer. So, welcome back if you're coming back. If this is your first time joining us, glad you made it. My name is Taggart. You can find me at Twitter there. And what we've been doing for the last 14 weeks, something like that, maybe 12 weeks. Who knows what time is anymore. But what we've been doing is we've been working on Python, we've been learning some cybersecurity, and we've been doing Python through the lens of cybersecurity. Now, at this point in the video is usually when I would tell you to like and subscribe to the channel to help me out and help other people find this material. But because this is the last episode and because of what happened last week, I'm not going to ask you to do that. So I want to take a minute to explain what happened last week. So you might have noticed that there was a video that was up very, very short, very, very briefly, and then it was gone, where we finished our PyTasks app and we added proper authentication. We talked about password hashing. And all of a sudden it was gone. Why? Well, the reason is YouTube hates hackers. That's glib, but it's not too far from the truth. The reality is that YouTube's community guidelines expressly prohibit the encouragement of illegal activity, which they include hacking in. Now, I want to make a couple of points here. First, hacking is a vastly misused term. A lot of times when people, especially in the general public or in the media, use the term hacker, what they mean is cyber criminal. That's not the same thing. A hacker is somebody who takes known items and puts them together in interesting ways to solve problems. If you've ever done that, you're a hacker. And so that's part of the, programmers have to be that by the nature of the work that they do. And thinking like a security professional is part of that as well. You're taking things that are intended for one use and you're thinking about other ways in which they could be used, maybe for nefarious purposes. But if you're a security professional, you're doing that to protect people, not to cause chaos, not to commit crimes. Hacking is not a crime. Cybercrime is a crime. There's in fact a federal law about it called the CFAA, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And it expressly prohibits the unauthorized access of computer systems that don't belong to you. Cool. What we were talking about in the last video was about how weak passwords, even if they are hashed using a modern hashing algorithm, are not necessarily safe because those hashes, when unsalted, right, when we don't add anything to the password string before we hash it, those hashes are known and they can be looked up easily. And I demonstrated that on a site that stores those password hashes. At no point did I access a computer that was unauthorized, that I was not authorized to access. At no point did I encourage anyone to commit crimes. Quite the opposite, I was encouraging people to secure their systems. Nevertheless, YouTube decided that the video violated those community guidelines and took it down. Now, I appealed immediately, explaining the educational nature of the video and how nothing I did actually encouraged people to break laws or broke laws. Nevertheless, YouTube stands by the decision and they're not going to release the video. Now, shame on me, I did not record that video independently, so that video is sadly lost to the mists. But what it tells me broadly is that this platform is not safe for people like me who want to teach about security and programming. And if we talk about those things that can be scary when used in an inappropriate way, but we're talking about them so that people are safer, YouTube isn't going to back us up. And so I'm not going to stick around on YouTube. That doesn't mean I'm not going to keep making content after this, but it does mean that I'm going to be moving elsewhere. So what's next is after the end of HackSummer, if you're interested in the kind of content that I've been producing and you want to see more of it, you can see it on Twitch. So Twitch is a streaming platform that is largely for gaming, but there are a lot of programmers over there and a lot of hackers over there as well. So I'm going to be moving over to Twitch. In fact, right after this. So if you stick around after the end of this episode of HackSummer, for the next half hour after that, I'm going to be doing my first stream over on Twitch, doing a little bit of Code Wars, doing a little bit of, programming katas in some different languages that we haven't seen before. So if you're interested in that, head over to twitch.tv/mttaggart. Give me a subscribe there if you're so inclined. It'll be very, very similar, a little bit more unstructured. We'll do all sorts of stuff. We'll hack on some CTFs. We might do some other stuff and different programming languages as well. Yep. So again, if you're interested in that, twitch.tv/mttaggart, TAGGART. Go ahead and give me a subscribe there if you're so inclined, and thank you very much. All right, so let's finish up with HackSummer before heading over to this new adventure. So what we were doing last time, even though it's impossible to see, is finishing up our PyTasks app. And I'll make sure that the replit pages for both the client and the server are available in the notes for this video, the description for this video, so that you can access what we did at the end. Largely what we did was we added a delete method to the client so that we could delete tasks. We used hashes not only to protect passwords, but also to give tasks unique identities so that they could be easily looked up without having to worry about, the username and what sequence in the list they were or anything like that. So that was largely what we did last time, hashing and adding a delete function. And what we're going to do this week is, first of all, congratulate you. If you've stuck it out through all of this and you've learned something about Python, you've learned something about cybersecurity, you deserve congratulations. You should be proud of yourself. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you too. You have done something for yourself. You have undertaken to learn a new skill and to grow as a person. Those are all extremely commendable. And even if not all of it made sense, you're just kind of watching it, you feel a little bit lost, and you got to go back and try some of this again, or you need other resources, that's all good. It's all learning. We're conditioned sometimes to think that if we can't succeed the first time, that it's a failure, especially if you were a good student in school, and things came easily to you. A lot of times if the second you run up against something that's really challenging, it feels like a massive failure. That's not the case. It takes a long time to learn a lot of these skills. And so even if you're just at the beginning of your journey, I still congratulate you for undertaking it, and know that it's like the quote about cycling. It never gets easier, you just go faster. There's always more to learn in this field. That's one of my favorite things about it, is that there's so much to learn. There's so much to experience. And you never know what's coming up next. You never know what the new vulnerability is going to be in security, or you never know what the new JavaScript framework is going to be if you're doing web programming, or the next Python library that you're going to need to use. It's a really exciting field for that reason, if you get excited by learning like I do. So what we're going to do with our final session today is talk a little bit about what your next steps might look like, depending on the path that you're choosing. And we're going to focus our discussion here on kind of 3 different paths. Whether you want to learn more Python, whether you want to pick up some other programming languages to round out your programming experience, or if you want to continue in cybersecurity, but you're not really sure exactly what that would look like. We're going to talk about those 3 paths today. And yeah, I'm going to make the interesting choice of being on camera the whole time. So you're going to deal with me drinking coffee sometimes. That's how that goes. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to recommend before we get into any of the other topics is learn Linux. no matter which of those fields or any of the other tech fields that you're going into, I really can't stress enough how valuable learning Linux has been for me. In fact, I would go so far as to say that if I had not learned Linux, I would not be in the position I am today, having had a successful career in education technology, being an independent software developer, and working as a security analyst. None of those would have happened if I hadn't broken my MacBook Pro in 2009, gotten really frustrated with the tiny little Windows netbook that I got to replace it, and then 2010 actually, and then installed an Ubuntu distribution on it, and then started learning all about Linux from there. If that sequence of events hadn't happened, I don't know, maybe I'd still be an English teacher, but I'm really excited by what happened because of those incidents. I encourage you to learn Linux because not only will you gain a deeper appreciation for the underlying technologies for your computer, but it's going to be a baseline that you can use to build out other skill sets. I have to tell you that as a programmer, I find it much easier to build software on Linux than I do on a Windows computer, unless I'm doing something just for Windows. So having Linux as a base is really, really valuable. And as a matter of fact, most of the fun stuff that I do for security work also also involves Linux. I'm not basing this on Windows. Some stuff I have to if it's PowerShell or whatever, but generally I'm typing into a Linux terminal. So I recommend learning Linux, and I recommend learning the Linux command line and getting really comfortable with that. And I guarantee that that's going to be content that I'm going to be covering over on Twitch in the future. So if you're interested in that, you can stick around there. One resource that I really recommend for learning Linux and a few of these other skills as well is going to be, let's see if this works. Yeah. A Cloud Guru, which used to be called Linux Academy. Now, a Cloud Guru and Linux Academy are the same thing now. But this is really kind of, they focus on cloud, right? Amazon Web Services, Azure, Google Cloud, but they also have Linux specific training as well. And their Linux stuff is awesome. There's too much to go through here, but they have certification courses if you're interested in that. Getting started with Linux, other DevOps technologies like Docker or Kubernetes. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's fine. But just know that a Cloud Guru is a great platform to get started with kind of the Linuxy side of things, especially if you want to be a system administrator or something like that. Now, I don't love advocating for paid services. I think knowledge should be free to the degree it can be. But that being said, I have paid for a Linux Academy account for a couple of years, and I found it worth its cost. So if you're in a position to invest a little bit in a service and Linux is kind of where you want to go next, this is where I would recommend you head next. Now, maybe you're interested in doing some more Python, and that's great. Python is a growth language. It's really taken off the last couple of years, and it shows no sign of stopping. If you're interested in Python from a security perspective, you're in a really good position because there are essentially two languages these days that most security tools are getting written in, and that's Python and Go. And so I highly recommend, if you're interested in building or using security tools like that learning more Python is a great place to live. Python's also really popular, as we discussed way back at the beginning, in other fields like data science or machine learning and AI. So if you're interested in those fields, Python is also a great foundational language. If you're a younger student, I don't know why the AP Computer Science course is still using Java, but I feel like the writing is on the wall that it's going to head over to Python in the not too distant future. So again, it's just a solid language to build your programming experience on. So if you want to have a more formal Python educational experience, more formal than what we've done here, and kind of go through really like the nitty gritty of how Python works and use it as kind of an intro computer science experience, I really strongly recommend the MIT offerings on edX. If you haven't used edX before, edX is a MOOC, massively online open courseware system provided by MIT actually, and a few other universities collaborate with it as well. But the MIT X Computational Thinking Using Python series, there's 2 courses in it. An earlier version of this course, the Introduction to Computer Science and Programming Using Python, is how I learned Python. Honestly, it was the first thing that I did. And I still think that it is the best introduction that I have ever found. It is not easy. It might take some time to go through all of the exercises, but if you commit to it, it's really, really fantastic. All right. Let's move on from edX. Oh, I would also add that if you are interested in data science, this is a killer course. This last one, the 6.00.2x, just incredible. So I'm a big believer in MIT. There's there's another set of courses from Stanford, and it's really funny that the way that the 2 coasts approach this. I would call MIT's offerings a little bit more graybeardy. They're a little bit more old school, which I love. It feels more like I'm learning real comp sci. Not that the Stanford courses aren't great. I prefer the approach of the MIT ones. Okay, so maybe you're interested in learning other programming languages. And this is going to be a little bit different. I don't have necessarily specific, I have a couple of specific recommendations, but there are so many other languages to learn. It's going to be difficult to pick one, right? But we're going to go through a few of the possibilities. One thing I want to mention is that you've already done the hardest part. If you've gone through this series, the first programming language that you learn is the hardest to learn. Everything else after that is cake. Well, that's not true. It's not cake. As I said, it doesn't really get easier. You just go faster. But learning the first one is the hardest because you don't have any frame of reference. But when you learn your second language, you're going to be able to say, oh, okay, variables are in this language different in this way from Python, which I already know. So you have that extra piece where you can say it's different in this way, really, really allows you to learn more facilely. You can create these knowledge structures using that differentiation, which you couldn't do when you were learning Python. So I think for most folks, when they think about programming these days, I think the next step is I want to make an app, I want to make a website, whatever you want to do. So the web is 3 technologies that you're going to want to learn. If you're interested in having content that you build on the web, you're going to want to learn the holy trinity of the web: JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. These 3 languages work together. They are what make web content. So HTML is the presentation of the content. It is the document that you are seeing in your web browser, right? If we look at a web page and we go to view source, what you'll see is HTML. It's code. It's built-in tags, but that's kind of the document part of it. And in fact, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Now, old school websites look terrible because they were raw CSS. I still have a soft spot in my heart for old websites. They're nostalgic, and I think that sometimes the no style is the best style. But sites these days look good. They have interesting design, and the reason that is true is because of CSS. CSS, or cascading style sheets, are how you style your HTML content. CSS also does a lot of animation of content as well. So those two are really, really important. HTML presents content, CSS styles the HTML. And then finally, JavaScript is the behavior component. It allows interactivity with the content on the website and also can modify in real time what you're seeing on the page. So this is a rabbit hole, right? There's a lot to go into web programming, right? JavaScript is a massive language at this point. There are lots of different frameworks and libraries and modules that people use, all sorts of ancillary tooling that they use to build JavaScript-based projects. But these are the basics. And to get started on the basics, I actually really recommend Free Code Camp. So Free Code Camp has really great free tutorials on how to get started with JavaScript. And I think that they also kind of have a pipeline to certification that you can pursue. And if you're interested in really becoming serious as a software developer, Free Code Camp is an excellent place to start. Now, the other place that you might want to consider is a site called Pluralsight. Now, Pluralsight is paid, but what you get for your money is, I think, pretty worth it. So Pluralsight used to be, I used to use a site called Code School, which doesn't exist anymore, and that's how I really learned a lot of JavaScript. Code School was acquired by Pluralsight, or I think they were both the same company anyway, but they absorbed. And the course library here is pretty awesome. If we load this up, you can see that they've got JavaScript, they've got HTML, they've got Python even, and some other languages, Java, C++. They even have some Linux stuff. You can see that they have even some security stuff as well, right? Kali Linux, the CISSP, which we'll talk about. So if you're willing to pay, and I think it's $29 a month for a personal plan. If you want to pay annually, I think you get a slight discount on that. It's, it's not nothing, right? But at the same time, and this, by the way, is almost identical to the price of Linux, a Cloud Guru or Linux Academy. I think Pluralsight does a better job with programming than Linux Academy does. So, depending on which area you want to focus on, that's something to consider. But think about it in terms of tuition, right? This is a vast discount on what you might pay at a university or something, and the skills are the same. So if you have the money to invest and you're looking to make this leap in your career, I really recommend maybe spending some time. Now, that being said, we're also going to be exploring some cool programming languages on Twitch, but and YouTube has other great content as well. There's a lot of free stuff out there that's great, but I think that the investment in a specific platform is a motivating factor as well. I know that when I paid for certification courseware, when I was going for my security certifications, I was like, well, I paid for it, I better do the thing. So that's something to consider as well. If you make an investment in yourself that way, it may motivate you to accomplish the goal. All right, so we talked a little bit about the web. What we haven't talked about is some other languages around systems programming, and I wanted to quickly call these out because I think they are at a different level than what we've been doing. So when we talk about programming languages, there's kind of there are layers of abstraction. All the way down to the machine code, right, that the CPU of the computer is actually interpreting or executing. One layer up from that is assembly language, right? Which we haven't really talked about, but often comes into play when we're doing some security stuff like reverse engineering or binary exploitation or whatever. And then one layer up from that are some languages that were directly abstracted from that assembly language to make it easier to work with as a human being. And so, for example, we call those systems programming languages because they have so much control over the system, and can, in fact, even build their own operating systems. So languages in this family, there are more, but I think the C's are worth mentioning. So first is C, just original C. It's been around since the 60s, I think 68. It was designed at Bell Labs, where Unix came from as well. And in fact, a lot of the original, Unix-like tools that we use were designed in C. And it was designed specifically for this reason, that they needed a way to build tools more easily than assembly. So C is a great programming language. It's still used all the time. And I admit that I was really afraid of learning C for a long time because of its power and its aura. But there are great resources for learning C. Now, a newer language, although it's like 40 years old, 30 some years old now, is C++. C++ is an object-oriented language that takes C and adds objects to it. C doesn't have those natively. And has a dizzying array of applications. Windows is written in C++. And a whole bunch of other stuff is too. So C++ is, I think for a long time, it was like the language to learn. Certainly in the 90s, it felt that way. It's less true now, but it's definitely still something to consider if you're really interested in systems programming. And C, I should also mention C and C++ also, if you're interested in embedded systems like Arduino or robotics or something like that, because these languages are so low on the abstraction layer, they tend to be fast, right? And for that reason, they're and also not so power hungry. So they're often used in those austere environments where power and computing power are at a premium. Now, C#, which it's a music pun, but also it's like if you take like two pluses and put them together, you get or it's like it's four pluses, I guess, right? Plus plus and then plus plus. You put them together, you get the pound sign or the hashtag mark. C# is a language from Microsoft, and it's part of the .NET programming language family, and it has all the power that you see in C++ and C, but it has all of these extra tools as well that really, really make it a strong contender for a modern programming language as well as a powerful one. I think a lot of people get into C# from gaming because C# is the scripting language in the Unity game engine. So if you work in Unity at all, you're going to do some C#. But it's also a great language for Windows work. So something to consider if you're interested in working on Windows systems, including in security. There are some security tools written in C# that are pretty nifty. And then lastly, before we move on from systems programming, I have to give a shout out to my favorite systems programming language, which is Rust. Rust is a contender to replace C. C, one of the C's drawbacks is that it's very easy to make security mistakes, show-stopping security mistakes in C because of the way that it manages the computer's memory. Rust was designed specifically to not let those mistakes happen. Rust is from Mozilla, the same folks who developed Firefox. It is an open source language. It's in development, but it's stable. And I don't know. I think it's really fun. It's not the easiest language to learn, but man, learning Rust made me a better programmer. In part because it is this really interesting kind of fusion of some object-oriented techniques and functional techniques. Now, a lot of people compare Rust to another programming language called Go from Google. Go is really intended as kind of like a replacement for C++ that's a lot friendlier. And I've used Rust. I've used Go. I find Go, it's a easier language to read. The syntax of Rust can be a little bit off-putting the first time you see it. Go is a little bit cleaner to read, but it just, I don't know, Go didn't click for me. But a lot of people swear by it, and I will say that a lot of security tools are written in Go. So in addition to the resources that I've shared before, the Free Code Camp, Pluralsight, even Linux Academy kind of has some of material on this. We have tools that we've discussed before, like Exorcism, that have all of these languages and more. And if you want to really kind of get your hands dirty with some of these languages, I really think that once you get to a certain point learning languages, this comparative approach is really, really powerful, because you solve problems in a language that right, like Python, and then you go try to solve them in another language. That really highlights the differences in approach. So you understand the language in a deep way by comparing it to the knowledge you already have. So Exorcism is great for that, as is Code Wars, of course. And if you stick around after the stream, we're going to be over there in Twitch doing a little bit of Code Wars. So if you stick around, or you head over to twitch.tv/mttaggart after this, that is going to be what we do. Lastly, for resources in learning other languages, and this really applies to everything that we're talking about today, No Starch Press. I love these guys. No Starch has just the best tech books. They're just the best, across a dizzying array of topics. And they even have comics. If you're a younger student, or you have kids who might be interested in stuff like that, they have books on Scratch for kids, to get started with programming, but just all sorts of different stuff. If they have hardware hacking, I don't know. I can't say enough good things about No Starch. I have bought, I don't know how many No Starch books over the years. I have a really large library of these ebooks. And yeah, so you can get No Starch books as a paper book. You can get them as an EPUB if you're a Nook user, or just like what's the open e-readers, Kobo. They have Mobies for Kindle, and also they have raw PDF. So, and no DRM on any of them. So you can get these as you prefer them, and they're just a fantastic publisher. I highly recommend supporting No Starch Press. And books are great because once you have them, right, the videos aren't going to go away or anything like that, so you kind of have the book. All right. We're going to pivot now from talking about programming specific career paths to talk a little bit about cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a gigantic field, and sometimes you'll hear the term cybersecurity and InfoSec or information security used interchangeably. This is my quick take on those two terms. InfoSec or information security is a wider field than cybersecurity. Information security is everything involved in maintaining the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of all information in an organization. So that also includes things like disaster response, physical security, like making sure that the door locks are effective and that you have security cameras. All of this stuff is part of information security. It really is. Whereas cybersecurity is very focused on the security of networked computing devices. That's kind of the sub focus of cybersecurity within information security. So if you're working in cyber, you're working with computers. If you're working with InfoSec, you probably are working with computers, because everything is these days, but there's a slight distinction in your approach and what you may also be doing. There are so many different options if you're interested in information security or cybersecurity. And the first thing you got to do is you got to explore the options. You got to know what you're excited to do before focusing. take it from somebody who tries. There's too much to learn everything. You cannot be awesome at everything in this field. So you want to pick something and really dig in. And whatever you pick, you better love, because if you end up doing it, right, you're going to be doing a lot of it. So a couple of potential options, right? You could be what I am at the moment, which is a security analyst. What I do most days is I work to protect the organization I work for from cyber threats. I read threat intelligence reports. I look at reports and data from the monitoring tools, intrusion detection systems, intrusion protection systems, prevention systems, sorry. And use vulnerability management tools to look at the state of our environment and see, okay, what needs to be remediated, what threats are facing us right now, externally, internally. We do what's called threat hunting, where we start with a hypothesis saying, is this threat present in our environment? How would we validate it? And then we use our tools to go seek that data and either affirm or negatively validate that hypothesis. This is what we call blue team work. It's defensive in nature. I really love it, and one of the reasons I love it is because at the organization where I work, we mix in a little bit of red team. We use some offensive threat emulation. We pretend to be bad guys sometimes, and we use that to see how good our defenses are, which is super fun. Related is the role of a security engineer, where you're building or maintaining those tools that allow the analysts to do the work that they do. If you really want to get into the weeds on the technicals of this stuff, that's what you're going to do, right? Security engineers, generally speaking, better be awesome programmers, or certainly network experts. Gotta be, because they're going to be maintaining the tools that have to do with networking and monitoring the network. You also could go a little bit off. So this is very much like the blue team defensive side in an organization. There are also roles that specifically focus on threat intelligence. So taking a look at what's going on globally, what the communications are from threat actors, if you're working for a security company like Recorded Future or FireEye or somebody, what are all of your customers seeing in their environments, and then analyzing those observations for patterns about threat actors across the globe. I think this is super cool work. Very, very Jack Ryan, right? You're taking a look at the landscape of cyber threats globally, and you are distilling that information to provide value for the folks who rely on your information to protect their organizations. You could also be on the red team. You could be an offensive security specialist. So here you could be a penetration tester or an offensive security engineer, where you are building or using tools to, in conjunction or in collaboration with the operations team, the blue team at an organization, you are testing the defenses of an organization to see how good they are. And you're doing that by using the same approaches that attackers might. So again, this is hacking, but this is not a crime, right? This takes place under a contractual agreement where you are supposed to be doing this. If you do not have an agreement to try to break into a system to test its strength, you are a criminal. So we're not doing that. We are doing the other thing, where we're working within the strictures of the law, but using these tools and techniques to keep people safe. I think this offensive security gets a lot of press when it comes to the InfoSec universe, right? They tend to be like the most visible or the most celebrated component. But I have to tell you that there is a lot of joy to be found in protecting folks and keeping people safe. So I think that, for my own personal experience in this field, which admittedly I'm still learning too, there's real value in knowing how to do the offensive stuff, because then you can learn how to protect against it. But knowing that you're kind of on the wall, keeping people safe is a great feeling. One other really cool specialization within cybersecurity is DFIR, digital forensics and incident response. So when something goes bad, the DFIR team is who comes in to analyze exactly what happened, right? They do deep dives they capture images of a computer. They will analyze the memory, the file system. They'll see, who did what, when, how did the attack happen, what happened next. Really kind of breaking it down and analyzing very specifically what took place on a system to understand the story of either a successful or an attempted attack. Now, DFIR is really, really exciting. It is very, very rigorous. You really need to make sure that what you're doing in DFIR, if you're going to do DFIR, you got to know your stuff. And a lot of the procedures in DFIR have to be followed to the letter because you are collecting evidence which may be used in a legal proceeding. Very often DFIR will engage with law enforcement. And so, and if you're collecting evidence, you have to maintain chain of custody. You have to make sure that the images that you take are cryptographically sound, right? That there can't be any tampering with them after, from the moment of capture to storage and then to presentation in court if necessary. So this is a really, really exciting field. I only brush this field, so if you want to learn more about DFIR, check out, actually, there's a great person on Twitter called DFIR Diva, and I think you should check her out to learn more about this field. She maintains a bunch of great resources for digital forensics and incident response. But no matter what you're interested in doing, what you want to do is find something you're passionate about. That's really the key here. You want to be able to go to work every day excited about what you're doing. And whether that's security, whether it's software development, whatever it is, tech has a lot of things to do and a lot of things to be excited about. You want to find your passion. And I didn't make a slide about this, but I would also mention you got to find a place that welcomes you, that feels right. Honestly, tech has too many white dudes in it. I know, but and there's a little bit of gatekeeping. I think people can be a little bit jealous about the knowledge that they have and worried that if other people get it, that they're somehow threatened by that. That mentality is gross to me. I want to share my knowledge. I want more people to have these skills. But yeah, just be aware that there's a lot of great in tech, but there's also a lot of gross. And if something doesn't feel right, follow your instincts and find a better fit if you can. I know that sometimes you got to pay the bills, but to the degree possible, definitely find a place that respects you for you. One other piece in the security field that I think merits a little bit of conversation is the certifications conversation. Unlike in software development, really, a huge part of the job application process in cybersecurity and information security is certifications. There are a bunch of different certifying entities that will take your money for you to take an exam and say that you know what you know. And not all certifications are created equal. I've had some experience with certifications, and I will tell you what my experiences have been in terms of best value for money. So there are some certifications that are really, really expensive, but also important at a certain point in your career. Certifications they don't make you better necessarily, but sometimes they're kind of a pay to play situation where if you have a certification on your resume, you'll get past, hurdle 1 or 2 of a hiring manager to get an interview. So they can be worth it. So these are actually the 2 certifications in security that I have, the CompTIA Security Plus and the ISC2 Certified Information System Security Professional, the CISSP and the Sec Plus. These are great. They're very different, and they're both multiple choice both multiple choice exams. They're not what we call practical or performance based, where you have to like do a thing. You have to answer questions. But these are kind of for the cost of they're under $1,000, I think. So at that price point for the course material, the exam, and the exam that you have to sit for in a testing facility, I think with COVID they're doing it differently now. But for that approach, I think these two are the best value for money. I think the Sec Plus is also one of the DoD approved certifications. So if you require a Department of Defense approved certification, that's one. They're very different though. The Security Plus is very much about the technologies around information security and understanding kind of the base technicals. The CISSP is very much more about understanding how information security works in an organization. And very often the questions are about what is best for the organization, not necessarily what is the technical best answer. I will say that going through the process to learn this material and taking the exams, I hate taking tests, but it was worth it. I used the knowledge on a daily basis. So I think these were probably the best value for money, especially if you're getting started in your career. There are a couple of others though, right? There are like these black belts of cybersecurity. We have the GIAC family of certs, and those are kind of next level. They're pretty expensive too. And then you have kind of, if you're in the offensive security realm, there is a group called Offensive Security, and they have some pretty well-regarded certifications. These are, I feel, very much for when after you've gotten started. They're kind of like for the second tier of your career. And their price point reflects that as well, because they're not cheap. They're the courseware and the course materials and the exam are both over $1,000. So you want to, if at all possible, you want to see if you can get your organization to pay for them, right? Rather than pay out of pocket yourself, which is why I feel like it's a second step certification, right? Once you've gotten your foot in the door, you want to grow to that next level. This will help, and your organization hopefully can help offset the cost of that growth. There is a middle ground that is kind of a newer group that has come up called eLearn Security. They are offering lesser known, but I think still solid certifications on a bunch of stuff. And so they're a little bit less expensive than the GIAC or offensive security certifications. They may be a place to look as well if you're interested in having a credential, but also maybe can't meet the price point of the GIAC or offensive sec material. Good courseware, and people that I trust believe that they're a pretty solid option. In terms of resources for some of this stuff, I think one that I really want to share with you is partially how I got my start with the InfoSec stuff, which is Cybrary. Cybrary.it has free materials, but they also have kind of a premium membership that will unlock a whole bunch more courseware as well as labs for you to test, to experiment with software or tools. I use Cybrary in preparation for the Security Plus exam, as well as a bunch of books, and yeah, it was good material. I really recommend Cybrary as a starting point. If you're really getting excited about especially the offensive side, and you want to play some more with that, I think the greatest resource that I found recently is tryhackme.com. What tryhackme does is it has a bunch of different rooms that set up virtual machines, and then there are either challenges that don't give you any instructions or walkthroughs that do, and teach you the tools and techniques for breaking into systems, again, legally, right, as an ethical hacker, but where you learn these tools in a controlled environment so that you are not, you're hacking on computers that you have authorization to do so, rather than computers that it would be a crime to do so. So this is a lot of fun. I do a little bit of try hack me basically every night at this point. Go into a room and poke around and see if I can get root on a box. I have a lot of fun here, and the stuff that I practice on here and learn, I then take into my day job, which is defensive in nature, and say, okay, are we defending against this? Can I protect against this? So I think super valuable as a resource if you're interested in really the technicals of offensive cybersecurity. They also do have defensive stuff if you want to learn some blue team tools like Splunk, or I think they have some forensic stuff as well in there. So whatever your interest, TryHackMe is worth checking out. They have a free tier and a paid tier. I think it's $10 a month for the paid tier, and honestly, for the material that I'm getting, it's a no-brainer. We're almost done with this very long talk. This is like a conference talk without the conference. But speaking of conferences, go. If you're interested in security, go to conferences. There are a bunch of them, and a lot of them are virtual right now, so the barrier to entry is pretty low. One just ended that is fantastic, the Wild West Hackin' Fest, which usually takes place in Deadwood, South Dakota. Was I think my first big security conference, and I loved it. Really can't wait for that to come back around to being an in-person conference. Really, really fantastic. Now, I am a serious introvert. I know it might not seem like it here. I have a teacher mode that I can turn on and do this when I need to, but generally speaking, I don't do well with crowds. I don't do well with loud noises. But so even if you're somebody like me who has that disposition, go to conferences. First of all, information security has a lot of people like us in it, so you can find some kindred spirits, and the right conferences can be very welcoming. And that's, getting to know other people who are starting out or who are welcoming to newcomers is so validating. I really am glad that I got over my concerns about going to conferences and did go, because it was a great learning experience. There's so many good talks, villages where you can experiment with stuff. That's how I learned lockpicking, and just the people that you meet. It's a great time. Now, often with conferences, but not always, there's another kind of event called a CTF, or a capture the flag. And these are competitions where you are, again, hacking on a bunch of kind of pre-established machines for you to try to exploit. And if you want to learn some of these tricks of hacking computers, this is a great way to learn. You can join up with a team and learn from others who are more experienced, or you can attempt solo and see how far you get. I love doing CTFs. They're super fun, and when they're attached to conferences, they tend to be my favorite part, especially when I'm working with others to do pieces of them. The information security, the best parts of the InfoSec community are fantastic. They are welcoming, diverse, interesting, clever, funny. And there's also some gross parts, like any community. But I think, it's pretty active on Twitter. If you come correct, if you come with kind of an empty cup, as Bruce Lee would say, you will be welcomed, right? If you come like a jackass, then you will be treated as such. But I think that I have found the information security community to be a really important part of why I enjoy being where I am. So engage with it, the right way, but there definitely get to know some folks in the community. It'll make you feel less alone if you're just getting started, and it can be a lot of fun. right, friends, this is the end. We have come to the end of this talk about where to go next in your programming or security journey. I hope that these videos have been helpful to you in some way. I hope that you've enjoyed learning some Python and some security with us the last few weeks. And I really am appreciative of your time and attention and the effort that you put into learning something new. I think it is a mark of a good human that you do something like that. If you are grateful for the material in any way and you feel like giving back, I'm going to ask you one more time to consider giving to Human IT. They're a nonprofit that provide low-cost internet connections and computing devices to families in need, and families do need across the United States and elsewhere. So if you can provide either lightly used devices or give financially, you can check them out at human-it.org. And that's going to about do it for our final episode of HackSummer. Again, thank you so much for joining us here. I've really enjoyed putting these together for you. I hope you have enjoyed watching them. And at 11 Pacific, I'm going to move over to Twitch. And we're going to do a little bit of Code Wars just to test out this new format and have some fun. So if you're interested in checking that out, I'll see you on twitch.tv/mttaggart. But for now, thank you so much, and have a great fall.